Thanks for watching this video from the Bible Fulfilled. My name is Alex Polyak. I am the director of the Bible Fulfilled. And today I am going to be talking about the crushing of Satan. If you took a survey of Christians, most of them would no doubt say that the crushing of Satan is a future event. After all, there's so much evil in the world, right? But is that really what the Bible teaches? What I present today will probably surprise many of you at first, but if you listen to the end, I think you'll see that it makes sense, both scripturally and emotionally. Okay? All right, so what does the Bible teach about the timing of the crushing of Satan? Well, let me start with the Old Testament, specifically Isaiah 27. So Isaiah 27 prophesied that Leviathan, that twisted serpent, would be punished when the stones of the altar were beaten to dust and the fortified city was desolated. Okay, so who is Leviathan? Satan. Psalm 74, verse 13 to 14 describes Leviathan as the multi-headed serpent who would one day be crushed. And you can read this in Psalm 74, verses 13 to 14. So Leviathan is Satan. Moreover, Isaiah said Leviathan would be punished or crushed when the stones of the altar are beaten to dust and the fortified city is desolated. The stones of the altar the stones of the altar beaten to dust refers to the destruction of the temple. And the fortified city being desolated refers to the destruction of Jerusalem. The context clearly shows that. So Isaiah said that Satan would be punished or crushed when the temple and Jerusalem were desolated or destroyed. Now, these events should sound very familiar because Jesus prophesied about the same event in the Olivet Discourse. Jesus said, quote, "Not one stone of the temple will remain upon another." And then Jesus said the city of Jerusalem will be desolated. This is the same event that Isaiah spoke about. Jesus mentions the temple stones just like Isaiah. And then Jesus mentions the desolation of Jerusalem just like Isaiah. Okay, and now when did Jesus say this would happen? Jesus said it would happen within his generation. He said, quote, "Assuredly I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away till all these things happen." And that's Luke 21, verse 32. So it must have all happened within Jesus' generation. And by the way, a generation refers to about 40 years. You can read this in Hebrews 3, verses 8 to 10, or Numbers 14, verses 30 to 34, or Nehemiah 9, verse 21. So this is when this must have happened, in approximately the year 80-70. Now, did it happen? Yes. In fact, according to the first century historian Josephus, the city of Jerusalem and the Jewish temple were destroyed in the year 80-70 by the Romans. Therefore, this is when Leviathan, or Satan, must have been punished or crushed, according to Isaiah. Here's another point to consider. Leviathan, or Satan, could not have been destroyed prior to the writing of the New Testament because Peter said in approximately the year 80-64 that Satan was, quote, roaming around looking for someone to devour. And this is you can read this in 1 Peter 5, verse 8. Although Paul said that Satan would be crushed shortly in Romans 16, verse 20. So in the year 80-64, Satan was still alive, but he would be crushed shortly. Furthermore, Leviathan could not have been destroyed after 80-70 because Isaiah said it would happen when the temple was destroyed, which happened in the year 80-70. Keep in mind, the New Covenant temple of today, which replaced the one that was destroyed in 80-70, is the church, of which Jesus is the cornerstone and Christians are the living stones. And you can read this, by the way, in 1 Peter 2, verses 4 to 9. So the temple today is a spiritual edifice, right? It's a spiritual building. Jesus is the cornerstone of this church, and we Christians are the living stones. Now, this new covenant temple will never be destroyed, because to destroy it would be to destroy Jesus, the cornerstone, and that's not going to happen. Nothing's going to overpower Jesus. And besides, Matthew 16 verse 18 says the gates of hell shall never prevail against the church. So this won't happen. So logically then, the only time Leviathan or Satan could have been destroyed is when the old covenant temple was destroyed in the year AD 70. That's the only time period that fits. Okay, so another reason we can be sure that Leviathan or Satan was crushed in the first century is because Isaiah said it would happen, quote, when sin was taken away. This is the same passage I just read, by the way, Isaiah 27. And Isaiah says that Leviathan would be crushed when, quote, the iniquity of Jacob will be covered and sin will be taken away. Okay, so when was sin taken away? In the first century, right? Jesus took away sin, right? He died for our sin and atoned for our sins, right? Hebrews 9 verse 26 says, quote, but now once at the end of the ages, he has appeared to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself. So Christ was offered once to bear the sins of many. Okay, and this is Hebrews 9 verse 26. So Jesus took away sin in the first century, as all Christians acknowledge. Therefore, this is when Leviathan or Satan must have been destroyed too, per Isaiah. Okay, so now let's look at what the New Testament says about the timing of the destruction of Satan. Okay, Jesus said, quote, now is the, and this, by the way, was approximately the year AD 30 during his earthly ministry. He said, quote, now is the judgment of the world. Now the ruler of the world will be cast out. And the ruler of the world here is Satan. So Jesus says, now the ruler of this world will be cast out. So now, not in 2,000 plus years. So this must have happened in Jesus' generation. In another passage, which I already mentioned, Romans 16 verse 20, Paul says, quote, the God of peace will crush Satan under your feet shortly. He's talking to the apostles here. So he's saying the God of peace will crush Satan soon under your feet, under the apostles' feet. This is, again, Romans 16 verse 20. So Paul said shortly. Again, not in thousands of years. He said shortly. Then, in the year AD 65, the angel of Revelation said Satan would be cast into the lake of fire, where he will be tormented day and night forever and ever. And this is in Revelation 20, verse 10. And when would this happen? Revelation goes on to say, quote, do not seal up the words of this prophecy of this book, for the time is at hand. So when Revelation was written, this prophecy was at hand. In other words, Satan was about to get thrown into the lake of fire. And in fact, by the year AD 65, John said that the devil, quote, knew his time was short. This is Revelation 12, verse 12. So once again, this shows that the devil's time was short. He was about to be destroyed when Revelation was written. So all these passages give the same timing. Jesus and the apostles expected Satan to be crushed in the first century. Now, a possible objection is, how could Satan have been destroyed in the first century when there's so much evil in the world, right? And this is a good question. I mean, it's an understandable question. My response is this. First of all, we don't need Satan for there to be evil. I mean, the prophet Jeremiah said, quote, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. This is Jeremiah 17, verse 9. Likewise, the apostle James said people are tempted when they are drawn away by their own desires, which leads to sin. This is James 1 verse 14 to 15. So people are quite capable of sinning and doing evil all by themselves. We don't need Satan for this. Secondly, Revelation teaches that there would still be evil or sin after the destruction of Satan, even in the new heaven and earth. Now let me prove this. Revelation 20 describes Satan being cast into the lake of fire, and you can read this in Revelation 20 verse 10. Then in chapter 21, it describes the arrival of the new heaven and earth and the new Jerusalem. Then in chapter 22, it talks about sin, and this is in the new heaven and earth after Satan was thrown into the lake of fire. Let me read the passages that say this. Okay, so again, chapter 20, it says, the devil who deceived them was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet are, and they will be tormented day and night forever and ever. So this is Revelation 20, verse 10. So the devil was destroyed in chapter 20. He's gone forever. Then in chapter 21, John, the writer of Revelation, says, quote, now I, John, saw the new heaven and earth, for the first heaven and the first earth have passed away, and also there was no more sea. Then I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. Then I heard a loud voice from heaven saying, behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them, and they will be his people. God himself will be with them and be their God. This is Revelation 20, verse 1 to 3. Now, I want to read some more, but before I continue, let me point out something important. Notice how John said that he saw the holy city, the New Jerusalem, coming down from heaven. So what does the New Jerusalem refer to? It refers to the church. I can show this in three ways. First, Revelation, as I just read, describes the New Jerusalem as, quote, a bride adorned for her husband. Now, who was this husband and bride? It was Jesus and the church. And you can read this in Revelation 19, verse 7 to 9, or Ephesians 5, verses 25 to 27. So the husband and bride are Jesus and the church. And the New Jerusalem, the bride, was coming down, right? So the New Jerusalem is the church. Another way we can show this is, let's see, in Hebrews, the writer of Hebrews says, quote, but you have come to Mount Zion. He's talking about Christians here. So you have come to Mount Zion and to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, to an innumerable company of angels, to the general assembly and church of the firstborn who are registered in heaven, to God the judge of all, to all spirits of just men made perfect, to Jesus, the mediator of the new covenant. This is Hebrews 12, verse 22 to 24. So this passage says that Christians have come to the heavenly Jerusalem, the church of the firstborn. So the New Jerusalem is the church. Another reason we know this is because the Revelation passage I just read said it describes the New Jerusalem as a tabernacle where God meets his people. And as I just read in Revelation 21, verse 3. So the tabernacle is the church. The original tabernacle was a portable sanctuary and place of worship that Moses had constructed for the Hebrews during their 40-year wanderings in the wilderness. The tabernacle was the precursor to the physical temple, which was a type or shadow of the New Covenant church or temple. So these are three reasons that we know the New Covenant or New Jerusalem is the church. Okay, so let me read a few more verses from Revelation. As I just said, chapter 20 describes the destruction of Satan, then chapter 20 describes the new heaven and earth and the New Jerusalem or the church coming down from heaven. And then John says, quote, blessed are those who do his commandments, that they may have the right to the tree of life, and may enter through the gates into the city. And the city here is the New Jerusalem. But outside the city, or the New Jerusalem, are dogs and sorcerers and sexually immoral and murderers and adulterers and whoever loves and practices a lie. And this is Revelation 20, verse 14 to 15. So notice how there is still evil outside the city, or outside the New Jerusalem, or the church. Keep in mind, this is after Satan is destroyed in the new heaven and earth, and there's still evil outside the New Jerusalem, or outside the church. Theologian Don Preston has pointed out in one of his debates that Satan's demise in the year 8070 did not mean his influence suddenly ended any more than Hitler's death meant, his influence suddenly ended. Hitler died decades ago, right? Yet his influence is still felt around the world. People still call themselves Nazis, draw swastikas and hate Jews, even though Hitler died long ago. Yet Hitler was just an ordinary man. How much more would this be the case with somebody of Satan's diabolical stature? The greater one's significance during one's lifetime, whether for good or for bad, the more one's influence will outlive him. Here's something else to consider. The first century Jewish establishment, those who pushed for Jesus' crucifixion and persecuted his disciples, They were a type or shadow of Satan. So when the Jewish establishment was destroyed in AD 70, that meant Satan was destroyed too. Now let me prove this. First, consider the meaning of the Hebrew word Satan. As author Tony Denton has pointed out in one of his studies on Satan, in the New American Standard Version of the Old Testament, the Hebrew word Satan is translated Satan with capital S 18 times, and it's translated adversary 8 times, and it's translated accuser 1 time. Accuser 1 time. The context determines the meaning. Furthermore, Satan sometimes refers to people. That's right, people. For example, in 1 Kings 11, verse 14, it says, quote, "Now the Lord raised up an adversary," a Satan, the Hebrew word is Satan here. So now the Lord raised up an adversary, a Satan, against Solomon, Hadad the Edomite. He was a descendant of the king of Edom. So as this passage explicitly says, Hadad was a man from the land of Eden, which today is southwest Jordan. And Hadad is called a Satan, or an adversary of God. That's what Satan literally means, an adversary of God. So this passage clearly shows that a Satan can refer to, people, just like Hadad the Edomite. And it's the same in the New Testament, by the way. The word Satan and other similar terms such as devil and antichrist can often refer to people. Here are some examples. Jesus called Peter Satan after Peter had suggested something contrary to God's plan. Matthew 16, verse 22 to 23 says, quote, "From the time Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed and be raised on the third day. But Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, 'Far be it from you, Lord, this shall not happen to you.' But he turned and said to Peter, 'Get behind me, Satan. You are offense to me. You are a offense to me. For you are not mindful of the things of God, but of the things of men.'" End quote. This is again Matthew 16, verse 22 to 23. So at this particular moment of time, Peter was being a Satan, or a adversary of God. Jesus also called Judas a devil. In John 6, verses 70 to 71, it says, quote, "Jesus answered him, 'Did I not choose you, the 12, and one of you is a devil?' He spoke of Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon, for it was he who would betray him, being one of the 12. End quote. This is again John 6, verse 70 to 71. Similarly, John called Jesus' opponents antichrists. Actually, the term antichrist is used only 5 times in the New Testament, and in every case it refers to people in John's day who were denying that Jesus is the Messiah. Let me read those passages. It's actually 3 passages, but it's mentioned 5. There's 5 different times it's mentioned. Okay, so let me start with 1 John 2, verses 18 and 19, and verse 22 to 23. It says, quote, "Little children, it is the last hour, and as you have heard that the Antichrist is coming, even now many Antichrists have come, by which we know it is the last hour. They went out from us, but they were not of us. For if they had been of us, they would have continued with us. But they went out, that they might be made manifest that none of them were of us. Who is a liar, but he who denies that Jesus is the Christ? He is Antichrist, who denies the Father and the Son. Whoever denies the Father does not have the Son either. He who acknowledges the Son has the Father also." So again, this is 1 John 2, 18 and 19, and verse 22 to 23. In another passage, 1 John 4, verses 2 to 3, it says, quote, "This is how you could recognize the Spirit of God. Every spirit that acknowledges that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is from God. But every spirit that does not acknowledge Jesus is not of God. This is the spirit of Antichrist, which you have heard is coming, and even now is in the world already." Again, this is 1 John 2, verses 4 to 3. So the Antichrists were already in the world when John was writing this passage. Okay, one last passage, quote, I here is John. So I, John, say this because many deceivers who do not acknowledge Jesus Christ as coming in the flesh have gone out into the world. Any such person is a deceiver and the Antichrist. This is 2 John 7. So these are the only references to Antichrist in the entire New Testament. And contrary to sensationalist end-time preachers and Hollywood, Antichrists refer to people in John's day, in the first century, who were denying that Jesus was the Christ, not to some super demon who will one day, rule the world. That's the stuff of end times fiction, not the Bible. Okay, so as these examples show, terms such as Satan and the devil and Antichrist often refer to people, and they also often refer to groups of people. For example, Jesus called the Jewish establishment of his day the synagogue of Satan. Here's what he said, quote, I know the blasphemy of them which say they are Jews and are not, but are the synagogue of Satan. This is Revelation 2, verse 9. Jesus also equated his Jewish accusers to sons of the devil. He said, quote, you, and he's talking to the scribes and Pharisees, are of your father the devil, and the desires of your father you want to do. This is John 8, verse 44. And Jesus also equated the political establishment of his day to the devil. Quote, do not fear any of those which you are about to suffer. Indeed, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison that you may be tested. This is Revelation 2, verse 10. Likewise, Paul also equated his Jewish persecutors to Satan in 1 Thessalonians 2, verses 16 to 18. In verse 16, Paul said the Jews forbade him to speak to the Gentiles, yet 2 verses later, in verse 18, Paul said Satan hindered him. So logically then, Paul was equating his Jewish persecutors to Satan. So as these examples show, Jesus and the apostles often equated the Jewish establishment of the first century to Satan. And the reason they did that was because the Jewish establishment had a long history of opposing God. They killed God's prophets all through the Old Testament, and then they, of course, pushed for the killing of the Messiah himself in the New Testament. And you could read about this, by the way, in the parable of the wicked vine dressers in Matthew 21, verses 33 to 45. It gives the history of the Jews rejecting all the Old Testament prophets, and then they finally rejected the last prophet, Jesus. So when the Jewish establishment, which was a type or shadow of Satan, was judged and destroyed in the year 70, that meant Satan had been judged or destroyed also. Here's an illustration that might help. When a group of people unite and work together for a common cause or common purpose, such as the Jewish establishment in Jesus' day, the sum total becomes greater than the individual parts. Working together, the members can achieve much greater results than working apart. The members motivate each other, they encourage each other, they help each other, they embolden each other, they combine their brain power and they combine their physical strength and so on. So working together, the members can achieve much greater results than they ever could working apart. Moreover, such a group can almost be said to have a mind of its own collectively, because collectively it thinks up, things to do that the individuals never would have thought of working apart. Such a group can properly be described by personification. Such a group, if it is evil, could properly be called such names as Satan or the devil or Antichrist. Here's a quote from Dr. Ron McKay in a book called Satan, the Devil, and the Adversary on page 192 to 193. Quote, collective evil, for example, of a lynch mob, reaches a higher peak than that of the individuals in the mob. However, the corporate nature of evil is not unrelated to the evil or sin within the individual persons, even though it is finally greater than that, and therefore it can properly be described by personification. Just as a company, an institution, or a government may have some kind of personality greater than all the individuals within it, so it is with human sin and evil. We look at the horrors of Nazi Holocaust and wonder how individual human sin could possibly be responsible for it, because the total achievement of evil in it seems far greater than that of all the evil in people alive in Europe in the 1930s and 40s put together. The sum total of any group of people is often greater than the sum of the individual parts. And this is my part I'm adding here, and can properly be described by personification, end quote. So this may help explain how Jesus and the apostles could equate the Jewish establishment of their day to Satan. And when that Jewish establishment was judged or destroyed in the year AD 70, so was its personification, Satan. Now, I'm not saying that's all Satan was, is a personification, but this illustration may help show the relationship between the Jewish establishment and Satan, or the Jewish establishment of the first century and Satan. Okay, so for these reasons, I think we can be confident that Satan was in fact crushed in the year AD 70. As I showed, the prophet Isaiah linked Leviathan's destruction to the destruction of the city and temple, or the city of Jerusalem and the temple, which happened in the first century. Secondly, the New Testament gives many time statements that put the fulfillment in the first century. And then thirdly, Jesus and the apostles linked the Jewish establishment of the first century to Satan. And when the Jewish establishment was crushed, so was Satan. Okay, so that's it for today. Thanks for watching this video. For more information about the topics discussed in this video, get my book, The End is Here, How the New Testament's Prophecies Were Fulfilled, which should be out in a few weeks. Also, you can check out my website, thebiblefulfilled.com. I have a bunch of free articles and videos about the topics discussed in this video. And if you like this video, by the way, please do me a favor and hit the like button. It'll make it easier for others to find on the Google search engines and YouTube search engines. Also, if you want to be notified of new videos, just hit the subscribe button. Okay, so that is it for today. Thanks again for watching this video. Have a great day, and I will see you next week.